Greetings, viewers. I am Mr. Sheriff CJ Rampiele, and I'm the Councillor of Societies in the Val Triangle campus. And I am studying BA Law, my final year student. To intellectualize African languages means that we need to promote them and uphold them, in a sense that we need to have books, stories about them, and in a sense that we write them, we read them, and we teach learners about the African languages. Of course, it will be challenging in a sense that now our generation is more interested in English, they're more interested in speaking English and writing English and in knowing English. So it's going to be difficult to stick to our indigenous languages. And for us to succeed with intellectualization will help us in a sense that it will help us to sustain our African languages, it will help us to promote them, and it will help us to ensure that we teach the young ones where we come from. It is very important for us to know our culture, to know where we're coming from. So if we intellectualize them and succeed with doing that, so it will help us so that people will know, our children will know where we come from as African people.
Hello, my name is Lynn Mario Menezes de Souza. I am Professor of Language Education at the University of São Paulo, Brazil. I work with critical pedagogies, applied linguistics, multilingualism, language policy, and post and decolonial theories. I'm here to share some ideas of mine on what you call intellectualization, which is not exactly a problem that we have here in the area which I research, which is indigenous languages in Brazil. But there are certainly connections to be made. We are in both, like us, you are also talking about trying to recuperate invisibilized, excluded languages from a previous situation, which we could call colonial. So what I'd like to say is that I see three possible postures towards the problem. And I call them a political posture, a top-down linguistic posture, and a bottom-up linguistic posture. The political posture gives cultural and academic value to languages previously excluded and undervalued and invisibilized during colonization. And this posture demands a democratic right for education in the mother tongue. The second posture, the top-down linguistic posture, sees language as a static, abstract, and structural system, and it sees the mother tongue as a clearly bounded entity, distinct from the other languages with which it cohabits in the nation. The third, bottom-up linguistic posture, here it is language as seen by its users and not in a contextual or cultural vacuum. Here, language is seen as a dynamic set of available multiple linguistic resources for interaction. Here it is not a question of languages as in the top-down posture, but of repertoires. And in multilingual contexts, such as that of indigenous languages in Brazil, repertoires may include linguistic resources from across a spectrum of what the top-down linguistic posture perceives as languages as independent, bounded systems. In this sense, one needs to rethink and amplify the notion of a mother tongue, not as a closed, static, monolingual system, but as a repertoire of linguistic resources from what could otherwise be considered multiple languages. There are, of course, problems with each of these three postures. The main problem that I see with the political posture is that in its attempt to promote multilingualism as the respect for and the equality among multiple languages, it may in fact end up promoting the monolingualism of the previously excluded, invisibilized local language. The main problem of the top-down linguistic posture is that it doesn't take into account the role of literacy and its accompanying effects of decontextualization and standardization. These could have extremely negative effects on the existence of prevailing oral traditions in the language that the top-down linguistic posture seeks to defend. To intellectualize a language means to reduce it to writing, thus standardizing it and disconnecting the language from the oral tradition of the community. This would privilege the discourses of written culture, very different from those of oral traditions, where context, repetition, intonation, and the immediacy of possible interaction with a listener are important. If, as happens when oral traditions are transferred to writing, they are reduced to content independent of oral rhetoric and oral form, the simplified result may devalue the ancestral worth of the tradition. The problem of the third posture, the bottom-up linguistic posture, is this: considering that it values the mother tongue as a multilingual repertoire, it needs a political strategy that would protect it against the possibility of the repertoire being progressively cleansed of its non-hegemonic elements under prevailing institutional and national forces tending towards the monolingual. That is, if we are talking about repertoires, maintaining a mother tongue as a cross-linguistic repertoire in a school, it may be the forces, the homogenizing, standardizing forces of the school may in fact end up reducing the repertoire to a monolingual language. The example of indigenous schools in Brazil perhaps may shed some light on what I'm saying. Though indigenous schools in Brazil are permitted to teach in their own languages, many communities choose to use the national language, Portuguese, in their schools. What motivates this is a perception of the difference between education on the one hand and schooling on the other. Where education is what occurs in traditional oral and extramural forms, and which has happened and occurred continuously over 500 years in spite of colonization, and where schooling is what occurs within the four walls of a schoolhouse, inserted in written culture, introduced by colonization. These communities see schooling as a threat to their traditions and their view of education, but also as a necessary political strategy to becoming citizens of the non-indigenous nation without jeopardizing their traditional notions of education. This obviously results in bilingualism and a perception that just as Portuguese may not be compatible with indigenous languages and indigenous knowledge, indigenous languages may not be compatible with Western knowledges. However, it must be remembered that this is not a posture that sees languages, cultures, and knowledges as separate and fixed, but as resources which together form a complex repertoire within an open system, as it were. So just some concluding remarks. The problem may ironically lie in how and from where one considers intellectualization as an imperative. If it is considered from a Western perspective of written culture and modern science, inherited from colonial history and monolingual colonizing nations, the demand for a monolingual bounded mother tongue as a medium for academic production, as a move towards decolonization, may in fact be mirroring colonial values. It may be seeking to replace one form of monolingualism with another. Clearly, one cannot wish to turn the clock back on colonial history. It has left us entangled in multiple languages and cultures, and it is from and through these entanglements that one must think, avoiding the pitfalls of either-or solutions. Such, I think, is the endeavor of thinking multilingualism otherwise. I hope this small contribution may help in thinking through the intellectualization of languages in South Africa. Thank you.
I am Professor Abiodun Salau, Acting Director of the Indigenous Language Media in Africa research entity at the Noordwes-Universiteit in South Africa. This is my response to the question, what does it mean to intellectualize African languages in South Africa? To intellectualize African languages in South Africa means to be able to use those historically diminished languages for education in any field of human endeavors, from the primary to tertiary level. This presupposes that the languages are able to be used for discussion of theories and concepts in the different disciplines or subjects. It is also to plan for the process of accelerating the growth and development of the indigenous languages, for them to be used in domains of science and technology, government and legislature, business and economy, quality journalism, and other aspects of modern life. I emphasize quality journalism here because journalism has been practiced, in African languages, but in tabloid forms. That is, African language journalism has not been able to grapple, with some serious, quote and unquote, or technical matters, probably because of the limitation of our languages to cope with the registers, of those technical areas. For instance, African language journalism has not been reporting science and technology. They have also not been reporting business and economy. Yeah. So to intellectualize African languages, would mean to be able to use our languages to report issues like that, like science and technology, business and economy, legislature, and all that.
My name is Professor Russell Kashula. I'm presently the NRF Chair in the Intellectualization of African Languages, Multilingualism and Education at Rhodes University. My research interests are in applied language studies and forensic linguistics. What does it mean to intellectualize African languages in South Africa? According to Havranek, this intellectualization culminates in scientific theoretical speech determined by the attempt to be as precise in expression as possible, to make statements which reflect the rigor of objective scientific thinking, in which the terms approximate concepts and the sentences approximate logical judgments. But I think this intellectualization cannot be seen as a single process, but rather, according to Gonzalez, as a phenomenon of many dimensions. It includes various aspects and stages of what other scholars have called language cultivation and modernization. Such aspects include various activities such as the following: the development of orthographies of hitherto unwritten languages, as well as standardization and harmonization of orthographies in cases of linguistic and social variation, the development of grammars and language learning handbooks, the development and standardization of specialized technical and professional registers for various professional and academic disciplines, i.e. terminology, the compilation and production of various types of dictionaries, i.e. lexicography, textbook production for different educational levels as per language in education policies, translation of various texts from other languages, and then finally the development and localization of modern technological tools and software for language processing and advanced communication purposes, i.e. human language technology. And finally, it should also be noted that the intellectualization of languages does not occur in a vacuum, but occurs in the context of hegemonic traditions, policies, and practices. And this is the same for all of our South African languages as well. The process is an integral part of socioeconomic, cultural, political, and intellectual evolution of our society.
Well, first of all, I'm Professor Langa Kumalo, the director of the South African Center for Digital Language Resources at Northwest University. I'm a linguist. I'm also a corpus linguist. I have also worked in the area of computational linguistics, focusing on natural language processing. And of course, I have worked very extensively in language planning. So what does intellectualization mean to me? Intellectualization is a very broad area that dates back to the Prague School. And it means for African languages to provide facilities that enable an African language to develop a lexicon and logical expression that makes it possible for it to function in teaching and learning in higher education, in research, in scientific innovations, and in all spheres of life. And by all spheres of life, I also want to include articulation in the media, where it finds expression in what you call community radios, where contact is with societies that speak specific languages, and of course having newspapers that actually publish in these African languages. So it is a language that has the capacity to have the whole gamut of expressive capacity, from mundane to the most scientific. That, to me, is an intellectualized language.
My response to the question, or the questions: what are the challenges to the intellectualization of African languages in South Africa, and what solutions can we bring to those challenges? These are major challenges, of the intellectualization of African languages in South Africa. Problem of attitude, to the use of these languages, for educational purposes in particular. It is a problem of coordination of the various structures, that are involved in development of terminology. And also, the problem of an inadequate number of trained lexicographers, and of course, the inadequate terminology and the relevant materials, like dictionaries and all that. So what are the solutions? In 1998, government, came up, with a program called the Olozela Language Awareness Campaign. At least, if that campaign did not achieve anything, it led to the tendency to use African languages in provincial legislatures, and also, for interpreting, in courts. So language awareness, campaign, would go a long way to bring about some solutions to these challenges, particularly, change in attitude, to the African languages. In that way, we will see this language awareness week, being organized by the Northwest University as a very right step, in the right direction. Another solution, will be creating new terminologies within a short period and maximize their acceptance. Also, the existing terminologies, should be collected and codified, and disseminated, to the relevant target. Another solution that we can bring to these challenges is the pragmatic approach to the okay, let me put it this way: pragmatic approach for the development of modern terminology for use, for use in science and technology. In this vein, we do not have to be too much of language purist. The kind of African languages spoken in townships can be used. We can start from there. It may not be it may not be the real thing to do, but at least we can start there so that the African language use can be embraced by our students, by our youth. Yeah, this involves code switching and code mixing. Of course, we can talk about the issue of human language technologies. Yeah, we can bring that in, and this involves text to speech. It involves automatic language dictation. Yeah, and it involves online dictionaries, online online glossaries, for the languages, because this is digital age, and our youth, mostly embrace, things on digital platform, and it is also believed that if we have those resources, online, it will be accessible to many people at little or no cost. Yeah, so it's important to do that. So we need, to really strive, to put African languages on the digital platform. And then lastly, I talk about harmonization and standardization of orthographies. Yeah, it has been said that many African languages, belong to certain language families. For instance, Unguden languages, we talk of the isiZulu, isiXhosa, Siswati, and isiNdebele. So these languages can come together, to harmonize and standardize, their orthography. And by so doing, it will be easier, it will be cost effective, to develop materials, in such languages, to develop terminology in such languages. Thank you.
So it can't really be doubted that early orthographic work in African languages was spearheaded mainly by the missionaries, and this has provided the basis for the intellectualization of some African languages today. However, it can also be seen that the work would encounter challenges, which I'll try and outline. And this is primarily because of the problems associated with the complex nature of orthographic work, orthographic reforms, and these have remained prominent tasks for language planners on the continent. And in South Africa, bodies like PanSalb and their predecessors have been producing terminology and orthography booklets for African languages and updating writing systems. But nevertheless, these orthography challenges remain, and they also affect the intellectualization of African languages. So the notion of harmonization of African languages, focusing mainly but not exclusively on orthographies, is also premised on the flaws of missionary orthographies, particularly the idea that the distinction between some of the languages is superficial. And this debate was initiated by Jacob and Hlapo, and then continued by the late Professor Neville Alexander, and more recently Professor Kwesi Kwapra with the Center for Advanced Studies of African Society. And I think primarily the issues of standardization also and harmonization have to be resolved appropriately before we can fully intellectualize our African languages. And this is one of the major challenges. So the implementation of harmonized orthographies, just like orthographic or even linguistic reform generally, has been quite difficult. Speakers of standardized languages also tend to be loyal to existing orthographies, as if they were national or cultural emblems that should never be tampered with. So the question of orthographies, of course, also, and harmonization influences the development of lexicographical work and dictionaries as part of the intellectualization process, and this will need to be resolved continentally and particularly in relation to South Africa for further intellectualization to take place. So this remains an ongoing challenge.
I think the biggest challenge in the intellectualization of African languages is the lack of what we call resources. And I want to use resources in a broad sense. And then I will chop it up to resources that pertain to expertise, i.e., the expertise that lie in the foundational theories towards the development of a particular language. That is vitally important, to have a scientific framework towards intellectualization of a particular language. That there is paucity of that skill. There is also paucity of funding for African languages. African languages in the African continent do not naturally attract financial resources. They are viewed as something that does not necessarily need investment in. And because of that, African languages do not get the investment it requires, the attention it requires, the resources that are necessary for them to develop to the level that they are required to develop. And then you will see that there is also paucity of grammars, and I mean linguistic grammars. Some African languages are not even written. They're not documented languages. So the lack of grammars and sound grammars at that. Some of the grammars that are in existence are also based on archaic theories that are no longer of main use in the understanding of language and society that we subsist in. And then the lack of dictionaries that are necessary, because they are the lexicon that you require to express, to have the expressive power of the language. So the lexicon is not fully developed, and so dictionaries are not there. And even dictionary culture is not there. English has an amazing dictionary culture. When you go into an English lesson, you have the necessary tools to walk into that English lesson. The teacher will prompt you whether you have the lexicon or the word list at the end of a grammar book. When you have limitations in the understanding of a particular lexical item, you have access to a dictionary, be it a hard copy dictionary or an electronic dictionary. They have resources, these fully fledged developed languages. But African languages lack those resources. That's another thing that actually impact negatively on the development or intellectualization of these languages. And so you have lack of resources that pertain to the teaching and learning of these languages. And then there's something, a caveat, that actually lends itself as a result of the paucity of those two main things, grammar and the lexicon, the reading culture. It is very difficult to see an African language learning student to be carrying a novel to read in a pastime, to be carrying a good grammar book to read in their pastime. So there is lack of that reading culture. And a fully intellectualized language is a language that is written a lot, a language that is spoken a lot, a language that articulates every single idea because it has the capacity, it carries the capacity. So the lack of these resources proscribe the development of African languages. And then the space, in terms of teaching space in the curriculum, in terms of the space in the academy, especially higher education. Some of the universities in this country, or in most African countries, don't even teach African languages. And when they are taught in another language, in English. You know, I can give you a lot of African universities that are actually teaching African languages in English. And it befuddles the mind, because you're actually thinking, why are they teaching this language in another language? Again, it is because the languages do not carry this scientific capacity for it to be taught in itself. And even the dictionaries, most of these languages have bilingual dictionaries. They hardly have monolingual dictionaries, i.e. a dictionary that has a lexical item in its language and a definition in the same language. Most of them are bilingual. You'll find a lexical item in Zulu, for instance, is an example, and a definition in English. And then you wonder, is this an isiZulu dictionary? That's the problem with African languages. And that, of course, impedes the development of African languages. So these are the challenges that African languages are faced. And that's why I characterized it as broadly the lack of resources, and resources in a very broad sense. I think the imperative exists that we need capacity. We need well-trained African language teachers and well-motivated African language teachers. African language teachers that love language. The tragedy in most cases is that, and I go back to my time when I was at the university. Hardly you would find, and I use this cautiously, a Black language student who loves being a language student. They would have aspired to do law, and their credits are less, and then they find themselves doing a BA or a BEd degree and training in language or language teaching. So they are from this onset not passionate about language. They have failed in something and they land themselves in this space. So we need to correct the passion and focus. You have to have people who love language and therefore love the right way of teaching language, so that, and who understand the reason why language must be taught correctly or accurately. Because then you have your ducks in a row. The language lecturer has been trained well, has received sufficient training, and they will train or teach language the way it's supposed to be taught. There is passion in their teaching of language. So we need to train our teachers and carry the passion in the teaching of African languages, because that's what we need to teach them well, so that we actually motivate our students to love their language.
This is my response to the question, why is it important to succeed with the intellectualization of African languages project in South Africa? I want to believe that if we are able to intellectualize South African languages, I mean the indigenous languages in South Africa, it will create avenue for access and dissemination of indigenous knowledge in South Africa. And that means that if these languages are developed in such a way as to be able to use them, effectively in the domains of science and technology and all that, it will create access to the knowledge, to the indigenous knowledge. And this indigenous knowledge, will also be able to be disseminated, to various kinds of people everywhere in the world. That's my sincere belief about this. By so doing, it will make African languages, in South Africa, economically viable. Yeah, students and people in the society can see the economic importance of these languages. Because now it's like, why should I embrace these languages, if it's not going to help me to progress in life? if it's not something that I can use, to do my work as a scientist, as an economist, as a banker, even as a journalist, even as a journalist. So why should I want to take it as anything important? But if they see the economic importance of these languages, if they know that these languages are economically viable, there will be embrace of the languages. I also believe that intellectualization of African languages in South Africa will save these languages from extinction. Yeah, because intellectualization of languages actually begins with the use of those languages. Yeah. So if the languages are able to be used in all human domains, all human endeavors, or in different domains of human endeavors, these languages, will survive extinction. The languages, will come alive. The languages will come alive. The languages will be strengthened, because they will be available, for use in every human domain. And with this, the languages, will not die, because they will be constantly used. Thank you.
I think I'd like to highlight two issues here. The one is the use of technology, and the other is the development of the continent itself through the intellectualization of African languages. So we already know that Saddler Northwes-University and the University of South Africa have done a lot of work on human language technology. And it's important, I think, to acknowledge this as part of the intellectualization process. And without intellectualization, we cannot take we can't make effective use of these human language technologies. Really, for this to happen, we need the continued intellectualization of African languages. And I use the word continued deliberately, because I think languages have always been intellectualized. We are just continuing the process. It's not as though we're starting anew. Even prior to the arrival of missionaries, our languages were intellectualized and used for educational purposes. The second point I'd like to make with regard to the importance of the success of this intellectualization project is that of development. And Eckhart Wolff makes the point very clearly that socioeconomic development cannot be divorced from issues related to language and to language empowerment on the African continent. And this is supported by Bamboshe when he states that development cannot be achieved unless it involves the participation of all in the developmental process. And such participation inevitably requires that people are reached and are able to reach others in the language or languages in which they are competent. So development is therefore about allowing people access to material wealth and to enable their economic participation in society through languages that they understand best. And ordinarily, this would be the mother tongue of an individual in any given society. This is even more pronounced on the continents such as Africa, where the acquisition of exoglossic languages such as English, French, and Portuguese remain a challenge. So if we talk about NEPAD and we talk about the Millennium Development Goals and so on, it's vitally important that the intellectualization of our African languages is continued in order to support this process of development on the African continent.
The UNESCO Declaration is that it is axiomatic for every child to be taught in the language that they understand the most, and that is the mother tongue. Because there are a lot of benefits in there. You are not just teaching them in a mother tongue, you are actually developing them cognitively. You are actually also developing their critical thinking skills. You are not also just introducing a language in the curriculum, you are also affirming themselves, because that's the only thing that they bring to this to the learning environment. They bring their language. And when you actually teach them in their mother tongue, you are affirming that which they have brought, the first tool that they have brought into the classroom. You are affirming that. And that's an excellent starting point to affirm a child or a pupil's first language in a learning environment. And that actually empowers them. It is amazing the amount of power that actually bestows to the learner when you affirm the language that they bring to the classroom. And well, when you have done that, learning becomes a second nature because it's happening in a language that they're familiar with. So it is vitally important to follow that UNESCO Declaration. It is taken as axiomatic that a child must be taught in a language that they understand the most, and that is their mother tongue. But you can only do that, and you can do it well, when they find a teacher who has been properly trained and is equally passionate. So again, our education system must actually train our language teachers very well. And again, that goes to media. When you communicate with a population or with a citizenship, you want to communicate to them effectively. And unfortunately, again, African politics has learned very well from the colonial past that information is power. And in order for them to control information, they disperse it in a language that the majority of the communities do not understand. So again, you can take it politically, that actually it is deliberate politics that we don't empower these languages, because by empowering these languages, we're empowering the communities that empower these languages. And therefore, the governments of the day are going to be held to account because the power now lies with the people. So again, it's a whole linguistic, political, socio-political, economic, etc. Because again, language is that important. It actually embeds what humanity is, you know. So there's all sorts of play that is happening when language is in question. So yes, and of course, to come to why, it's a constitutional imperative. We empower these languages, we intellectualize African languages, particularly in South Africa, because it is a constitutional imperative. Our constitution says we must achieve for all the 11 official languages, and hopefully 12 soon, parity of esteem. We must achieve that parity of esteem for all the 11 official languages. And why? Because they must be treated equitably. Again, because we are that kind of nation that views each other as equal. And so we have to provide facilities, resources for these languages to achieve that parity of esteem. So once you embed the Constitution, everything else falls into place. It is a constitutional imperative. There is no section of this country that must frown upon that phrase, because it bids us to actually satisfy the imperative. And of course, once that is a constitutional imperative, it becomes a linguistic right. It is a citizen's right for them to speak or to be spoken to in a language that they are comfortable in. So again, it is once it's a linguistic right, that right must be protected. So we are bid by a lot of factors to actually develop our languages to the satisfaction of the speakers of those languages, but it starts with the attitude.
So language can really play a very important role in transformation. And if we speak about transformation at South African universities, especially historically white universities, then language is absolutely imperative in the whole transformation program. And at Rhodes, we really started in 2006 with about 50 students, and today, on any given day, we have around 800 students studying isiXhosa across campus. And we also have a university staff course which allows you to carry on to an intermediary course and then to isiXhosa 1 and through to a major and even to do honors. And some staff are following that route as well. So in a nutshell, that is basically what we've done. And it's, I just want to end with a quote from David Crystal, who says that in 500 years' time, It will be the case, if it's the case that everyone will automatically be introduced to English as soon as they are born, if this is part of a rich multilingual experience for our future newborns, this can only be a good thing. If it is by then the only language left to be learned, it will have been the greatest intellectual disaster that the planet has ever known. So there's an onus on us as academics to promote multilingualism, to intellectualize our languages, and to see our languages as a rich resource in our lecture halls rather than being a problem.